right? Project Vulcan.
Hello everyone and welcome to another video on our own devices. I'm Jean Messier and today we're having a look at some truly tiny cameras. Yes, even tinier than the Minox that I've covered in a pair of previous videos. These are what are known as HIT type cameras, and these were introduced in the late 1930s in Japan and proved remarkably popular both in Japan and in North America in the immediate post-war period. Now, there were hundreds of different types of these produced by dozens of different companies, so I can't go over every single variation. After all, as I've said before, this is not a collector's channel. However, there is plenty of fascinating history to go over, so let's have a closer look at these and let me show you what these are and how they work. Now, these cameras are designed to use a peculiar film format that is 17.5 millimeters wide. Now, you might recognize that as being exactly half of the more familiar 35 millimeters, and indeed, this film was originally manufactured by cutting regular 35 millimeter film in half. Now, this film was originally intended for showing films and newsreels in remote areas without their own cinemas and was known as Pathé Rural. Though, because of its low price point and compactness, still cameras were also made for it. Now, these are generically known as HIT cameras after the HIT introduced in 1947 by the Tougodo company of Toyohashi, Japan. However, this was not actually the first camera of its type, being preceded by the Midget, introduced by the Musuzu Trading Company in 1937, and the Micro, introduced in 1938 by the Sanwa Trading Company. However, Tougodo's product was among the first to hit, pun intended, the North American market, and so the name stuck. Though in Japan, these are generically known as mame camera or bean cameras. Anyway, the Tougodo company was founded in 1930 in Kanda Ward, Tokyo, by three brothers-in-law, Nagatsuka Masanori, Tanaka Koichi, and Toyota Yoshio, and named after Admiral Togo Heihachiro, legendary victor of the 1905 Battle of Tsushima Straits, the name being chosen because founder Nagatsuka Masanori and Admiral Togo were both born in the city of Kagoshima. The first cameras produced by Tougodo were miniature box-style units using so-called no-need darkroom film. This was first introduced in 1929 by the firm Murakami Shokai, though it seems that Tougodo bought the patent soon after. As the name implies, this system allowed you to develop film immediately after exposing it without the need for a darkroom or a portable developing tank. The film sheets came individually packaged in light, tight paper sheaths with sliding paper covers, which were inserted into the camera one at a time. You slid the cover open, exposed the film using the camera shutter, then slid the cover closed. You then removed the sheathed film and dunked it in a tray of developing fluid, which was tinted red to desensitize the film so complete darkness was not needed. Finally, you remove the developed film from the developer, dunked it into a tray of fixer, then wash it under a tap to reveal the finished negative, which could then be contact printed onto photographic paper. So kind of an early distant ancestor of Polaroid, though of course not nearly as user-friendly or fast. And if I manage to get my hands on one of these no-need darkroom film kits, I will definitely be featuring one on this channel. Though of course I probably won't be able to demonstrate it because the film and the chemicals will be long expired. Anyway, at first, the Tougodo company found it very difficult to sell its products in camera shops, which dismissed them as mere toys. They were forced to buy up store space of their own to sell their products directly, or to hire toy, camera, and clock shops as licensed distributors. Even worse, the Imperial Japanese Navy was none too pleased with them using the name of Admiral Togo and asked them to cease and desist. But in a spectacular move, the company sent representatives to the home of the now 82-year-old admiral to ask him directly. And he enthusiastically gave his permission, and indeed his secretary, Admiral Ogasawara Naganari, even wrote the company an official license document and a signboard for its headquarters. And you can't get better publicity than that. Now, throughout the 1930s, the Tougodo company introduced a variety of camera models, including the folding number 4 Tougoret, Naisko, Yugigo, Leadgo, Hirogo, Maiko, and Meisupi, all of which used the same 28 by 40 millimeter no-need darkroom film as its first box-style camera. Interestingly, the Meisupi was a twin-lens reflex or TLR camera, but with the viewfinder assembly mounted beside the main lens instead of on top of it. And to learn more about TLR cameras and their cheaper cousins, the pseudo-TLRs, please check out my previous video on the subject, link in the description. In 1933, the company launched a monthly photography magazine called Kamera Shumi, which remained in publication for 6 years, while in 1940 it introduced a higher-end 35mm camera called the Maikai. However, following Japan's entry into the Second World War in 1941, camera production ceased and Tougodo was contracted by the Japanese government to produce war materiel, specifically parts for aircraft engines. However, as the Allied bombing offensive against Japan intensified, most of Tougodo's employees and machinery were evacuated to a pair of dispersal plants located at Toyohashi and Yamanashi. And while some production continued at the Kanda factory, it was completely destroyed in a bombing raid in February 1944. Now, at the end of the war in 1945, Nagatsuka Masanori decided to exit the photographic market, but the two other founders decided to press on. Now, the Toyohashi plant, run by founder Tanaka Koichi, survived for a while by producing various consumer goods, including cigarette lighters. However, in 1947, Tanaka decided to re-enter the photography market by producing his own version of the pre-war Midget and Micro, which he called the HIT. Now, originally, Tanaka tried to resurrect the company's old business model, but he found that due to various factors, including labor shortages and a lack of store space, had all been bombed out, this is no longer possible. And so Tougodo became a pure manufacturer relying on various distributors to sell its products. And due to the economic downturn following the war, this very economical camera proved extraordinarily popular with the Japanese public. Indeed, when first released, the HIT cost only 10 yen, or around 66 cents US, or $12 today, while a roll of film cost only a quarter of a yen. And this success, in turn, spurred dozens of imitators to flood the market. And so in addition to Tougodo-manufactured models like the Baby Max, Toyooka Ace, and Hobix, there were also new versions of the original Midget and Micro from the late 1930s, as well as dozens of other copies with colorful names such as the Beauty, Corona, Rocket, Tone, Vesta, Swallow, Honey, Gemflex, Top, Robin, Lovely, and Kitty. While most of these cameras followed the same Leica-style form factor as the Midget, Micro, and HIT, others were shaped like twin-lens reflex or even motion picture cameras. Right, so let's take a brief break from the history and actually have a closer look at these cameras. So the first camera I have here is a Tougodo HIT. As you can see, this comes with quite a nice quality leather case, which is stamped over the lens cover with the HIT cursive logo type. Now, on the back of the case, we can see the words "Made in Japan." Originally, these were stamped "Made in Occupied Japan," so this example was most likely made after 1952 when the American occupation ended. And if I pull this out of its case, you can see how truly tiny this is. This has a 30mm f11 astigmat lens and a 1/30th of a second Everset style shutter, which doesn't need to be pre-cocked. This is operated by this little lever on the right-hand side of the lens, while this little slider switches the shutter between I or instant mode and B or bulb mode for long exposures. As I mentioned in previous videos, this terminology comes from the rubber squeeze bulb often used to release the shutter while taking long exposures on a tripod, though this particular camera doesn't have that provision. And if I pop off the lens, you can see how the shutter mechanism works. Moving to the back, we have our film advance knob, a direct viewfinder, and a transparent red exposure counter window. If I open up the back, I can pull out the spool holder for the 17.5mm film. And that's really all there is to it. These are about as basic as a camera can get. Now, the second camera I have here is not a Tougodo HIT, but one of the hundreds of imitators, the Mighty camera, made by Tokoshashin KK of Tokyo. This comes in a nice stiff cardboard presentation box, and if we open this up, we see we have a nice leather case containing the camera and its accessories, a pair of instruction sheets for the camera in general and the spool holder particularly, and two boxes of 17.5mm panchromatic film. If we open up the leather case, we can pull out the camera itself. As you can see, this is broadly similar in design to the HIT, but with a number of extra features. The lens is f4.5 with a 23mm focal length, and unlike the HIT, we have a choice of 4 Waterhouse stop apertures, f3, 4.5, 6, and 8. Though just like the HIT, the shutter has a speed of 1/30th of a second and only 2 settings, I and B. Looking at the back, another unique feature here is the twin viewfinders, one direct like in the HIT, and the other of the reflex or brilliant type for waist-level candid photography. And also, unlike the HIT, the exposure counter window has a little sliding metal shutter on it to prevent light leakage. And on the bottom, we can see the words "Made in Occupied Japan," meaning this particular example was made prior to 1952. Also in the camera case, we have a number of accessories, including a spare roll of film, a lens hood that just presses on like this, and a 2-time telephoto lens that attaches with the set screw on the side. This also came with this little screw-on lens, which at first I assumed was to match the magnification of the viewfinder to that of the telephoto lens. However, this doesn't seem to fit anywhere on the camera, so I have no idea what it's for. Maybe it belongs on another model of camera and just ended up in the box. And a number of other accessories are also made for these cameras, including lens filters, snap-on waist-level viewfinders, portable developing tanks, enlargers, and tripods. And since most of these didn't have a threaded tripod socket, clip-on tripod adapters were also sold. Anyway, getting back to the history, although these were very popular in Japan, they proved even more popular on the North American market. See, one of these cameras, likely the Midget or Micro, since the HIT camera didn't exist yet, first appeared in US Camera magazine in September 1946. And soon after, the camera type got even more publicity when a US serviceman returning from Japan gifted one to singer and actress Marlene Dietrich. And in the wake of this, US importers started snapping these up by the hundreds of thousands, and sales in the US peaked at over 188,500 units in 1949. And this brought in a well-needed 8 million yen to the Japanese economy. Now, these were sold in novelty shops. They were sold in the back pages of magazines and comic books, often marketed as spy cameras, even though the image quality for these was nowhere near good enough for espionage work. Strangely, however, outside of children and a few photography hobbyists, very few people who bought these actually used them as cameras. Rather, they bought them as novelty gifts, as tchotchkes to put up on a shelf, or even as Christmas ornaments to hang on a tree. And indeed, a full third of the cameras purchased in 1949 were bought in the lead up to the holiday season. However, as is always the case with such consumer fads, the craze for the HIT camera proved extraordinarily short-lived, and by 1950, imports had dropped to a mere 50,000 units. Meanwhile, back in Japan, the purchasing power of the average citizen was rapidly rising, and a new generation of higher quality 16mm format cameras were arriving on the market, pushing the now obsolete 17.5mm Pathé Rural format off to the side. However, these cameras continued to be sold mainly as novelties into the 1970s, whereupon they quietly faded away from the photographic market. Now, getting back to the original manufacturers of these cameras, in 1957, Tougodo changed its name to Daishin Seiki, and in the 1960s, it left the photographic market entirely, instead becoming a general manufacturing contractor for the Pioneer Corporation. Other wartime dispersal factory in Yamanashi, managed by the third Tougodo founder Toyota Yoshio, changed its name to KK Tougodo in 1953 and also produced a series of fairly successful cameras, including the Muse Flex, Shinko Rabbit, and Meikai EL, remaining in business until around the 1980s. And that, dear viewers, is a brief overview of HIT-type cameras, which I believe offer a unique window into this fascinating period of Japanese history where the country was trying to dig itself out by any means possible from the economic devastation of the Second World War. It's also a neat example of one of these consumer crazes that sweeps the market every once in a while, and also they're just darn cute. And if you are a camera collector on a budget, these are a great place to start since there are hundreds of weird and wonderful variations, and they don't cost all that much. Anyway, thank you so much for watching. I'll see you next time in another video where we'll look at yet more cameras and other fascinating devices just like this. Until then, I'm Jean Messier from Our Own Devices. Have a great day.